All right, today on The Explainer, we are diving into one of the great intellectual dramas in all of history. We're talking about the relationship between philosophy and religious creed in the Islamic world. Okay, so let's get right into it. The whole story here really boils down to this tension. Scholars have this great phrase for it, a problematic duality. And it's basically a clash between two really powerful ways of understanding the world. You can see right away why they might not get along. So on one side, you've got philosophy. Its whole deal is using our own human reason, right? Logic, asking tough questions, not taking anything for granted, all to get to knowledge. But then, on the other side, you have creed. This is about truth that comes from a divine source, from revelation. And its method isn't questioning, it's faithful submission. And the goal? Well, it's salvation. So you see the problem, right? Their sources, their methods, they just seem completely at odds. So, is a huge crash inevitable here? Well, before we can even answer that, we have to ask a more basic question. What did philosophy even mean back then? Because, trust me, the answer is probably not what you're thinking. Yeah, see, it wasn't just sitting around thinking abstract thoughts. For them, it was this deep spiritual journey. It was an ethical quest. The goal was wisdom. And get this, they saw wisdom as a divine attribute, something from God. So philosophy wasn't seen as some competitor to religion. No, it was a way to become a better, more complete person. Almost you could say more like God. And here's where things get really interesting. We have this idea today of a thick wall separating, secular Greek philosophy from religious Islamic thought. But that's just wrong. It's a total misconception. The reality is, they saw it as a shared heritage. Think about it. A lot of the early Greek philosophers, guys like Pythagoras and Plato, they believed their best ideas came from divine inspiration. So when Muslim scholars hundreds of years later started translating these texts, they didn't see it as some, foreign attack on their beliefs. Not at all. They saw it as picking up the thread of one long, continuous search for the truth, a universal wisdom that belonged to all of humanity. And this quote just nails that perspective. Al-Kindi, who's often called the first major philosopher in the Islamic world, basically said, look, truth is truth, no matter where it comes from. But he didn't stop there. He went on to say that anyone who rejects truth just because it comes from a different source, well, in his own words, they're the ones who are devoid of religion. Why? Because they're literally turning their back on truth itself. That's a powerful statement.
Okay, so you might be thinking, great, everyone's on the same page. But that's not how the story goes. This open-armed welcome for philosophy, well, it didn't last. As the Islamic world grew and matured, a whole new field of study popped up, one designed to defend the faith on its own turf. And this led to a massive showdown, a clash of titans that would echo for centuries.
And that new discipline was Islamic theology, known as Ilm al-Kalam. And the people who practiced it, the theologians, you have to understand, these weren't just quiet scholars in a library. They were master debaters. Their whole job was to build ironclad arguments to protect the core beliefs of Islam from any challenge, whether it came from the inside or the outside. And that, of course, included philosophy. So theologians, and the most famous one here is Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, they started to systematically pick apart the arguments of the philosophers. They zeroed in on the exact points where philosophy seemed to clash with scripture. And these weren't small questions. We're talking about huge stuff like, is the world eternal, like Aristotle said? Or was it created? Does God really know every little thing that happens to us? When we're resurrected, will it be a physical, bodily thing? These were the battlegrounds. And let me be clear, this was not some polite academic discussion. The stakes were unbelievably high. We're talking accusations of heresy being thrown around. People were persecuted, their books were censored, and in the heartbreaking case of the philosopher Suhrawardi, he was actually executed for his ideas. This was a genuine fight for the soul of an entire civilization. And of course, politics was wrapped up in all of this. The fate of philosophy could literally flip overnight depending on which dynasty was in charge. Under the Seljuks, they pushed a theology that was really hostile to philosophy. But then you look at the Fatimids in Egypt, and they made philosophy a core part of their state's ideology. And even later, the Safavids in Persia, they set up schools where philosophy was taught right next to religion. It just shows you how much the political winds could shift everything. But the story isn't just about conflict. That's the amazing part. Faced with these powerful, sometimes dangerous critiques, the philosophers didn't just give up and go home. No way. They doubled down. They came back with even sharper, more sophisticated arguments to prove their point, that reason and revelation aren't enemies at all. They're just two different roads leading to the exact same destination, to truth.
And the guy who made this case most powerfully was the brilliant Ibn Rushd, or Averroes as he was known in Europe. His argument was genius. He said, hey, look at the Quran itself. It commands us to study the world, to reflect on creation. So he argued, philosophy isn't something foreign. It's just the best tool we have to do what God is telling us to do. In his view, to turn your back on reason wasn't just a bad idea. It was actually disobeying a divine command.
And what happened next is incredible. This whole intense debate didn't kill philosophy. It made it explode into all these diverse, brilliant new schools of thought. You have the rationalists, who were all about pure, hard logic. Then you had the illuminationists, who said, okay, logic is great, but we also need mystical intuition. And then you get thinkers like Mullah Sadra, who come along and create this just mind-blowing synthesis. They weave together reason, revelation, and spiritual experience into one grand unified tapestry of knowledge. Now, what's really fascinating here is that this whole back and forth, this centuries-long conversation, it wasn't a one-way street. It changed both sides. The lines that seemed so sharp and clear at the beginning, well, over time, they started to get really blurry. It wasn't two sides shouting at each other anymore. It became a shared dialogue. You actually had theologians starting to use the tools of the philosophers. Suddenly, they're digging into these deep metaphysical questions about existence and essence and causality, stuff that used to be strictly philosophy's turf. In the end, they basically started speaking the same intellectual language, and that changed everything. So why does any of this matter today? Because this whole story, this incredible debate, it isn't just some dusty piece of history. It raises a question that's maybe more relevant now than ever before. You and I, we live in a world flooded with information, with competing claims about what's true. And it leaves you wondering, doesn't it? How do we find our own balance between reason and faith? How do we figure out our own path to what's real?